Hi, everybody, and welcome to A Day in Their Boots, where we're walking alongside people shaping the future of public safety. I'm John Meyer, and today we're spending time with partners, innovators, and leaders who are making a real difference in law enforcement and the communities they serve. Joining us is Mark Fallon, who is a globally recognized expert in interrogation, counterterrorism, and national security. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here with you.
Mark, I think it's an honor. I get to interview a real life NCIS agent.
If you're expecting Mark Harmon or LL Cool J,
Okay,
don't disappoint you.
you started off with that. I have to ask you, how close is that to the real thing?
I don't watch the show.
Oh,
I used to watch it. I say I know Mark Harmon has read my book, and I was in LA a couple times and was going to go on the set, except it was during COVID, and they wouldn't allow any visitors. But there are technical advisors from NCIS for each of the shows, trying to
make it realistic.
Yeah, a little bit of realism. But what's probably most similar about the show is the camaraderie. We call it the NCIS family because you move overseas and you see people's family grow. Agents I work with, their sons or daughters are now agents, and so it's a very elite group, a cadre that goes around the world serving the Navy and Marine Corps.
Well, this is an honor because I watched the show, and then when we were on a call together, I'm like, it hit me. A real life NCIS. I get to interview one, so I got a little excited on it. Mark, this is your second event partnering with JPS Trust program from Strategic Communication. What drew you to work with a strategic organization?
Yeah, I think similar outcomes we're looking for. We're looking to improve the practice of policing. And what we offer, what I really like about what we offer is in this JPS Trust collective that we have with Strategic Communications is a one-stop shop. I started my career in law enforcement in 1976 as a police constable, and then did years with did a couple years with the Marshal Service, years with NCIS, Department of Homeland Security, and you're busy working. You're operational. You're working homicides, terrorist attacks, all these type of things. You don't have time to think. A friend of mine who got a sabbatical, she was a research psychologist, got a sabbatical to Yale University. And I said, I always hear that, what's the sabbatical thing? Tell me a little more about it. And she said, it's an opportunity for us to think. And I said, well, the government gave me that opportunity. They called it retirement. And so since that time, I've had the ability to think and reflect upon those more than 3 decades of operational experience, and then working as a consultant in the national security arena after that. And so what you find is you don't have time when you're on the job to think about the future, to think about what's on the horizon. You do after the fact. So this collective through Strategic offers the ability to come in and have expertise in different areas. So if someone wanted someone who, I gave a talk, the first time that I gave a talk for Strategic was about disruptive leadership. So they looked around and said, Mark, can you do this talk? And so if someone wants, I work with a company called iRecord. Someone wants a solution for interrogation rooms, where that process, you have the people on board with Strategic that have the collective experience to help out the consumer, the customer, the operator.
Mark, it sounds like a very excellent experience working with Strategic.
Yeah, great people. I'm really honored to be here with them in this booth here, particularly at ICP, where we have tens of thousands of law enforcement professionals from around the world. And I've been the chair of an impact section, the International Managers of Police Academy College Training section, and they come here from around the world to learn. And so hopefully we can convey some of the knowledge that we have over the years to them.
Mark, speaking of the IACP conference, we're here today and you have a book out and you're signing. Can you tell us more about this book?
Sure. After the USS Cole attack and after the 9/11 attacks, when the President Bush decided to use military commissions to bring Al-Qaeda terrorists to justice, I was assigned to work for the Secretary of Defense as the chief investigator, the deputy commander and special agent in charge of the task force responsible for bringing terrorists to justice for military commissions. And it was a challenging experience to be the person in charge of the investigations of Al-Qaeda and to try to ensure that you were preserving their rights why you were investigating that. And there's a lot of, the book is about a lot of the leadership challenges of what a leader faces when policing during crisis, policing in the aftermath of terrorist attacks. Talk about avoid homicides, 9/11 was almost 3,000 murders, right? And so when you work homicides, you're the voice of those victims. And so your job is to try to ensure that their voice is heard. And so the book talks about those leadership challenges that I faced. And as a matter of fact, I'm supposed to go down to Guantanamo again next month to testify in pre-trial motion hearings, because we've yet to bring any of those terrorists to justice for the 9/11 attacks because of some of the techniques that were used against them. And so that's what I try to talk about when I give talks and talk to police leaders. You need to think about the future. You need to think about how history will look back upon what you're doing, and to ensure that you're operating with the utmost integrity as you're operating, because you represent your organization and the country when you're doing that.
It sounds like approach the situation with integrity, because later on that might be brought up and might not be admissible.
Yes, correct. Yeah, and one of the things that we were concerned about was, when I was told that Secretary Anna Rumsfeld signed off on memorandum that said we could torture, and I said, we don't pledge allegiance to the Secretary of Defense of this country. We pledge allegiance to the Constitution. He doesn't have the authority to change law. And so as a federal agent, as an NCIS agent operating under the color of law or rule of law, I felt an obligation to stand up against that. And it was probably one of the best decisions I made in my life.
Definitely sounds pretty good, and holding your integrity for what is right and what should be done. Mark, with your 31-year federal career spanning the NCIS, counterterrorism, and the senior executive roles, what drives you to actually continue to work in law enforcement?
It's my passion. It was my calling. My father was a deputy chief of police, was his captain of detective bureau for when I was being brought up. My grandfather was a councilman and the commissioner of police in the town I grew up. My nephew is a detective in New Jersey, detective lieutenant in New Jersey. I come from a family of civil servants. My grandmother was the town clerk. My grandfather was a councilman. And so I don't hunt, fish, or golf. But I feel that I've had a unique role in history after the USS Cole attack, after September 11 attacks. And it's a way to give back so that future leaders, future generations can benefit from the things think of all the mistakes I must have made over those years. And so I'm able to try to convey and try to make sure that future generation of leaders make the right decisions. I call it policing with virtue.
Your work now actually focuses heavily on science-based interviewing and interrogation techniques. Why is this approach so important today for law enforcement professionals?
Yeah, there were some revelations in my career. I was taught, and I believed, an innocent person would not confess to a crime they didn't commit. I taught that, and I believed that for years. And it wasn't until the science of DNA, the physical science of DNA, showed that 1/4 to 1/3 of the people exonerated, court-ordered exonerations, wrongful convictions, had falsely confessed to crimes they didn't commit. It was astonishing. It opened my eyes. And when I was running the Criminal Investigation Task Force, investigating Al Qaeda, I oversaw, the estimates were probably about 10,000 interrogations. We had people in Afghanistan and Iraq and Guantanamo as a 200-person global task force. And we got a lot of bad information. And with bad information, uninformed decisions were made. Right? President Bush made a decision to invade Iraq and used some of the justification that there was Al Qaeda in Iraq. And that was given by the emir of the Calvin training camp, a guy named Ibn Sheikh al-Libi, who said there was Al Qaeda in Iraq because it was being tortured by the Egyptians. When he was released, he said, I just said that so the pain would stop. So we went to war in Iraq based on an uninformed decision, the results of torture. And so what we found since then is President Bush then decided we need to learn more about this and commissioned a study under the Office of Director of National Intelligence, the ODNI, published a study in 2006 called Educing Information, Educing with an E. And what they did is they looked back and they said it had been more than 50 years since the government had dedicated any resources to learning why someone would talk to a goon like me, right? How am I going to best get information? We were doing what was called customary learning here. So I did this on this case, and I'm going to tell a war story. I'm going to tell you what I did, and hopefully in your case, that will work for you, even though the context may be different. And we've gone by like that for years, and is a way.
Yeah.
But now there have been more than 150 government-sponsored research projects into effective interviewing, into the tradecraft of interviewing. There's been more than 225 peer-reviewed research studies published, and now this research is being operationalized. And so that was a real calling for me, because when I retired from the government as a senior executive in 2010, I was asked to become the chair of the High Value Detainee Interrogation Group Research Committee. This was a group formed when President Obama issued an executive order, 13491, and said, we will not torture anymore, but we need to know the most effective means of obtaining information, protect our national security. And so there's been millions of dollars spent now on effective interviewing, and now it's being operationalized. And so I'm passionate about getting this information so that we're getting better interviews. We're policing with virtue, because what we found is that if you use these new techniques, if you evolve and you embrace the behavioral sciences, the psychological sciences, the same way in law enforcement we do the physical science, right? We know how fast bullets travel.
Yep.
We know about DNA. Few people study effective interviewing, but there's more and more of that. Now in California, they passed legislation that banning deceptive practices with juveniles. And so what's happened now, there's been a movement now where they've looked at the research and said, well, the law may say juveniles, but we're not going to do that with adults either, because we see the research says it's more effective if we don't.
Yep.
We get more admissions and less false positives. You know, when I talk to law enforcement officers, I talk about we wouldn't issue a weapon that haphazardly misfires and hits unintended targets. So why would you do that with your interrogation programs? And so there's a whole new wave. I was out in Lake Tahoe last year at a science-based interviewing symposium put on by a prosecutor, a guy named Byrne Pearson. This is his third annual because he was tired of getting bad information from his law enforcement officers. He's had false convictions.
Nope.
Next month, later this month, I'll be in Cleveland, Ohio. Prosecutor out there is putting together a science-based interviewing symposium. There's companies. There's a company called Savage Training Group that does law enforcement training. They created a website, sciencebasedinterviewing.org, so law enforcement officers can learn more about the science. iRecord, they have a page dedicated to what the research is saying. So you can go on there and you can download the book that I'm a co-editor of, Interviewing Interrogation, a review of history and practice of World War II. You can download that. There's things called the Mendez Principles, a global standard of interviewer. You can download that there. So companies like iRecord, who are in the commercial enterprise, are saying, we also want to help the community. So they are now advocating for research-based methods with their customer base.
Mark, typically change is hard for people to do, but the proof is in the science.
Yeah.
To change your interrogation techniques over time, not do what you always once did, but to change the method to get more accurate results and information. Mark, for attendees visiting the JPS Trust booth here at IACP, what can they expect to learn or gain from this experience?
Yeah, I really encourage them to see the collective, to see a walk in everyone's shoes around here, because it's like if you had a medical issue and you go to the Mayo Clinic down in Jacksonville, Florida, you don't see one doctor. There's a series of specialists who specialize in different areas so that you come out of there with a diagnostic product that isn't just isolated to one area. And that's what they'll learn here at the booth. You have different expertise. I am not an expert in cloud data or things like that. I'm an expert in a national security profession, interview interrogation, expert witness, things like that. So you can come here and you can learn from me, but you can learn from all the other people that are in this booth here.
They're all in one place, and they can collaborate and they can work together, not only as a trusted law enforcement, trusted community.
It's correct. And if they come between 2 and 4 today, I'll be signing 100 copies of Unjustifiable Means and we'll be giving them out.
I'll see. Mark, as someone who's seen law enforcement evolve over 3 decades, what are the biggest challenges facing agencies today?
Yeah, it's trust. It's trust. We are having a problem with retaining and recruiting law enforcement officers now. And unfortunately, the trust factor has been diminished. And that's one of the things why I'm so passionate about eliminating what's called the false evidence clause, deceptive interrogation practices, where we go and we lie to somebody. We say, we have you on tape doing this. And even though the person knows they're not on tape, sometimes they'll just agree to it. They'll make a false concessions, I call it, to try to relieve the pressure, thinking that eventually it'll be learned that they're not on tape. But then no one believes it when they recant. And so we're using that on innocent people. So if someone comes in and they're innocent of a crime and we're saying we have evidence against you. Now they go back to their community and say, police just lied to me. They tried to set me up. We're using deceptive practices on witnesses. So we need to evolve from this coercive type methods to the reportability, to science-based approaches. So that let me talk about a study that was done by a research scientist I know at the University of Liverpool. Looked at thousands and thousands of legitimate interrogation tapes of terrorist suspects and found that the elite interrogators, the one that got the most information, were those that were honest, that were empathetic, that gave the person autonomy, and were reflective. That's what elite effective interviewers do. It's not what you see on TV. It's not trying to trick them. And so what we...
Or intimidate them or anything. It's literally being honest and emotional. Like, we know you're in this situation. Here's what we want to tell you and talk to you.
Right. And even with the guilty suspects, there's been a lot of studies on restorative justice, part of the constitutional policing model. And it shows that when a person's in court, and if they're convicted of an offense and sentenced, if they had a voice, if they were able to talk and say things, that they would be more receptive to the sentence, even if it was to their detriment. And that's the same thing with suspects. If you give them autonomy, if you treat them with dignity and respect, then you'll get a better outcome. I'll tell you one more story. I was giving a talk on Unjustifiable Means in Paris. And in the audience was a former Guantanamo detainee. And there's been videotapes. He was videotaped on giving an interview on Al Jazeera, talking about harsh conditions at Guantanamo. And he is an Algerian from France. And he said, after I gave my talk, he said, can we talk outside? And this is a former Al-Qaeda guy who was served time at Gitmo and was released. And I'm outside, and when I give talks on violent extremism, I show a picture of him and me hugging with a big smile. And he thanked me for the stance I took. He thanked me for what I did. So here's a former Al-Qaeda guy giving me a hug and then tweeting that people need to read Unjustifiable Means to see there's a different way than they perceive the Americans.
Mark, when you talk about restoring the trust, it sounded like from the community perspective, but you also said the trust for law enforcement to join law enforcement, right?
Yeah.
Because if you restore the trust that the community has within law enforcement, I think getting new recruits and retaining people will definitely build because the community is receptive to them. It sounds like a nice circle, right? You're giving and taking, but you're building trust all around.
I don't know of a more honorable profession than seeking to protect and serve your society.
Yep.
I mean, that's what I liked about NCIS. We weren't the war fighter, but we were the guardians of the war fighter. We're there to ensure that the Navy and Marine Corps can operate effectively to protect our national security. What could be more honorable than that? I'm very proud that my nephew is on the job, that my family is in this, and my friends, my social circle. So, I encourage people. We need to change the environment and, again, get away from these deceptive practices. Because what the other thing I talk about is in law enforcement, we should not be promoting a culture of lying, right? If I was involved in an officer-involved shooting, and would I want the investigators to be able to lie to me about what the evidence was against me?
Oh, that,
It's of course not.
yeah.
Then why would you do it with your citizens? They deserve the same respect that you give your colleagues.
And that's definitely restoring trust. Mark, looking ahead, what trends do you see in law enforcement agencies that they should prepare for?
Yeah, I think the AI is going to create a lot of problems for us. And so looking at how to harness that as a science so that we can ensure that we're getting some productivity at it. I mean, we resist everything, right? We always say when we're giving talks to law enforcement, two things police hate most are the way we was always done business and change.
And that's like you're actually going back against it. I want to change, but I don't want to do the same thing I've always done.
Yeah. And so embracing it, embracing that some of these things are technological advantage that can help us, that we can use to our advantage right now. I have a Ring camera, and it's getting smarter. It now detects it's not just movement in my garage, it's a person in my garage, it's a car in my garage. It detects that somebody's not just in my backyard, but they're mowing my backyard. My dog has arthritis and hops on 3 legs, and the little tiny dog, Spike, the Morkie, and AI tells me, the Ring camera tells me, rabbit hopping in the yard. So it knows the features of a rabbit. Someday it may tell me it's a Morkie.
Mark, one of the biggest things with AI or challenges that I see is detecting false information in it. Not only the pictures, the videos that are out there, but it's making harder for law enforcement to actually understand the evidence. Is this real or not? Do you see some of those as challenges?
Yeah, presume nothing. I think that's a term that Sherlock Holmes said in his fiction characters. Validate everything. I mean, that's why people say you're an interrogator. I was an investigator. I did interrogations as part of those investigations. But I mean, the military has interrogators. That's all they do. I did more than that, right? And so what you need to do is investigate, and you need to run leads to ground, and you have to be careful about cognitive bias. And that's what I see has been a detriment to policing with interviews and interrogations, because they go in, they've come up with an alternative hypothesis for what they think the crime was. And I see this in my expert witness law. And so then they try to convince the person to agree to their version of the crime. And then they may agree a little bit, they may make these concessions. And then once they do, they can't kind of turn around and get out of that because they're kind of committed to it. And so I worry about forming those same biases when AI tells you something that you believe ought to be the case. And now that becomes your reality rather than the facts of the case. And so investigate. Presume nothing. Run it to ground. It's not a fact until you've determined it to be a fact.
Until it's proven. Mark, my last question for you. For agencies unfamiliar with the JPS Trust, how would you describe the benefits they provide to the law enforcement community?
Yeah, it is a collective that can benefit them in ways that they may have not have thought of yet. And so the centuries of experience here, whatever we have here, is just unique. And so they can come by and just learn how to better do their job, how to best protect the public, how to become a better leader, how to become a better manager, how to utilize technology better to improve their practice of policing.
Nice. Mark, thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Really, it's likewise. Really appreciate it. Well, everybody, this is another episode as A Day in Their Boots. I'm John Meyer. Thank you for joining us.